After Black Sabbath's first success, journalists came to Ozzy's house and asked his mother what she thought about her son. Lillian Osbourne leaned into the microphones and said, "This music is the devil's work. I'm ashamed of my son." In that moment, Ozzy's world collapsed. That newspaper interview had wounded Ozzy deeply, but it would take 20 years for him to learn what his mother really felt. And when that letter arrived, Ozzy would feel stronger than he had ever felt in his life, because sometimes the deepest love hides behind the most painful words. The autumn of 1970 brought unexpected attention to the Osbourne family home on Lodge Road in Birmingham. Black Sabbath had just released their debut album, and the dark, heavy sound that Ozzy and his bandmates had created was capturing attention far beyond their working-class neighborhood. For 21-year-old John Michael Osbourne, success felt surreal. Just months earlier, he had been working dead-end jobs and getting into trouble with the law. Now, suddenly, people were talking about his band, playing their music on the radio, and asking for interviews. The Osbourne household had always been a place of simple values and hard work. Harold Osbourne, Ozzy's father, worked grueling shifts at the General Electric Company's metalworks. Lillian Osbourne, his mother, took in washing and cleaning work from wealthier families to help make ends meet. They had raised 6 children in their small terraced house, instilling in them the importance of respectability and staying out of trouble. When Black Sabbath's success began to grow, the family felt a mixture of pride and confusion. They were proud that their John was finally making something of himself, but they didn't understand what that something was. The music was unlike anything they had ever heard, and the band's dark imagery seemed to contradict everything they had tried to teach their children. On a gray Tuesday morning in November 1970, 2 journalists from the Birmingham Evening Mail knocked on the door. They had come to speak with the family of the local boy who was making waves in the music industry. Lillian, dressed in her best house dress, invited them into the front room where she kept her most prized possessions. The journalists asked about Ozzy's childhood, his family, and what it was like to have a son who was becoming famous. Lillian answered politely, sharing stories about John's difficult school years and his early troubles with the law. But then the conversation turned to the music itself. One of the journalists had brought a portable record player and asked if they could play some of Black Sabbath's songs for Lillian's reaction. As the heavy, distorted guitar riffs filled the small front room, Lillian's expression began to change. The darkness of the sound and the ominous lyrics seemed to assault her sensibilities. "What do you think of your son's music, Mrs. Osbourne?" one journalist asked. Lillian had spent 53 years navigating the challenges of working-class life in Birmingham. She had raised 6 children through rationing, wartime, and economic hardship. She had strong opinions about right and wrong, and she had never been one to hide her feelings when something troubled her. Looking directly at the journalists, with the heavy music still playing in the background, Lillian spoke words that would be remembered for decades. "This music is the devil's work. I'm ashamed of my son." The journalist recognized they had captured exactly the kind of quote that would make their story memorable. After they left, Lillian sat alone in the front room, listening to the silence and wondering if she had done the right thing. When the Birmingham Evening Mail hit the newsstands the following morning, the headline read, "Local Mother Condemns Son's Devil Music." The article quoted Lillian extensively and painted a picture of a family divided by generational rebellion. Ozzy learned about the article from a friend during band rehearsal. As he read his mother's words, printed for all of Birmingham to see, he felt something inside him break. The success, the excitement, the feeling that he had finally found his place in the world. All of it seemed to crumble in the face of his mother's public rejection. Tony Iommi watched as Ozzy's face went pale while reading the newspaper. "What is it, mate?" Tony asked. But Ozzy couldn't speak. He handed over the paper and walked outside, needing space to process what he had learned. When Ozzy returned an hour later, his eyes were red and his voice was hoarse. "She's ashamed of me," he said simply. "My own mother is ashamed of what I've become." In the weeks that followed, the relationship between Ozzy and his mother became increasingly strained. When he visited the family home, conversations were stilted and uncomfortable. Lillian would ask about his health and finances, the usual concerns of a mother, but she never asked about the music, the band, or the growing success. The silence around his career was more painful than outright criticism would have been. It suggested that his mother considered his life's work so shameful that it couldn't even be acknowledged. When neighbors asked Lillian about her famous son, she would change the subject or offer brief responses that made it clear she didn't want to discuss the matter. As Black Sabbath's success continued to grow, the distance between Ozzy and his family became more pronounced. unannounced. Albums like Paranoid and Master of Reality brought international fame, but each achievement felt hollow when he couldn't share it with the people who mattered most to him. Throughout the 1970s, as Black Sabbath became one of the most influential heavy metal bands in the world, Lillian maintained her public stance of disapproval. When journalists occasionally sought her out for follow-up interviews, she would decline to comment or offer brief statements that made it clear her position hadn't changed. But privately, Lillian was beginning to see signs that perhaps her initial judgment had been too harsh. Ozzy was no longer the troubled young man who had struggled with crime and seemed headed for disappointment. He was working consistently, earning good money, and while his lifestyle was unconventional, he wasn't hurting anyone. More importantly, Lillian began to notice changes in her son that she hadn't expected. Despite the dark imagery of his music, Ozzy himself seemed to be finding stability and purpose. When she saw him with fans, he was gracious and kind, taking time to sign autographs and speak with young people who clearly looked up to him. Still, admitting she had been wrong was not easy for Lillian. She had spoken publicly about her disapproval and made her position clear to family, friends, and neighbors. Pride made that admission difficult. As Ozzy's solo career began to eclipse even Black Sabbath's success, the gap between him and his mother remained as wide as ever. What Ozzy didn't know during those long years was that his mother had begun writing letters to him that she never sent. Dozens of them stored in a shoebox in her bedroom wardrobe, each one representing an attempt to bridge the gap between them. The letters chronicled her changing feelings about his career, her growing understanding of what he had accomplished, and her regret about the harsh words she had spoken in that newspaper interview. She wrote about watching him on television, seeing the joy he brought to his fans, and recognizing that perhaps there was more good in his music than she had initially understood. In one letter, dated 1975, she wrote, "I saw you on Top of the Pops last night, John. You looked so happy, so confident. I realized I haven't seen you look that happy since you were a little boy." Another letter, from 1979, revealed her growing awareness of his impact. "Mrs. Peterson next door told me her grandson was going through a difficult time, and your music helped him. She thanked me for having such a talented son." But each time she finished a letter, doubt would creep in. What if he rejected her attempt at reconciliation? What if it was too late to repair the damage? So the letters remained undelivered, accumulating like autumn leaves in that shoebox. The turning point came in 1989, when Lillian was diagnosed with cancer. The illness forced her to confront her own mortality and think seriously about the relationships in her life that remained unresolved. At 72 years old, she realized that pride was a luxury she could no longer afford. During her treatment, she found herself thinking more about Ozzy and the distance that had grown between them. He visited her in the hospital and was as attentive as any son could be, but their conversations remained surface level, avoiding the topic that had divided them for nearly 2 decades. One afternoon, while undergoing chemotherapy, Lillian struck up a conversation with a young nurse who was a Black Sabbath fan. The nurse, unaware she was speaking to Ozzy Osbourne's mother, talked enthusiastically about how the band's music had helped her through difficult periods. "It's not devil's music at all," the nurse said. "It's music for people who are struggling, who need to know they're not alone." Ozzy Osbourne has probably saved more lives than he knows. That conversation stayed with Lillian. That evening, alone in her hospital room, she began to write what she knew would be her final attempt to reach her son. The letter Lillian finally sent to her son in the spring of 1990 was raw, honest, and filled with 20 years of accumulated regret and love that had been suppressed by pride. "My dear John," it began, "I am writing this letter because I may not have many more opportunities to say the things I should have said years ago. I have been thinking about that newspaper interview I gave when you were starting out with Black Sabbath. I said things then that I have regretted every day since, but pride kept me from admitting I was wrong. I was wrong, John. Not just wrong about the music, but wrong about what kind of man you were becoming. I saw darkness in the songs and assumed it came from darkness in your heart, but I understand now that it came from pain you were trying to heal in yourself and others. Over the years, I have watched you grow into a man I am proud to call my son. I have seen the kindness you show to your fans, the dedication you bring to your work, and the love you have for your family. I have heard from people whose lives were touched by your music, who found hope in your words when they had nowhere else to turn. I realize now that what I mistook for rebellion was actually courage, the courage to be honest about pain and to create something beautiful out of something difficult. I want you to know that I have never stopped loving you, even even when I didn't understand you. I want you to know that I am proud of the man you have become, and proud of the difference you have made in people's lives. Please forgive a foolish old woman who let pride stand in the way of expressing her love. With all my love and deep regret for the years we lost, your mother, Ozzy, received the letter on a Tuesday morning in May 1990. As he read it, sitting alone in his home studio, he felt emotions he had kept buried for 2 decades begin to surface. The young man who had been devastated by his mother's public rejection was still there inside him, and that part began to heal as he absorbed her words. He read the letter 3 times before he trusted himself to speak, then immediately called his mother in Birmingham. When Lillian answered, her voice weak from treatment but clear with emotion, Ozzy could barely get the words out. "Mum," he said, using the childhood name he hadn't spoken in years. "I got your letter." "Oh, John," Lillian replied, and in those 2 words, 20 years of distance began to collapse. They talked for over an hour, sharing feelings that had been suppressed for far too long. Lillian apologized again for the pain she had caused, while Ozzy assured her that he understood why she had reacted as she did. Most importantly, they talked about love, the love that had always been there, but had been obscured by misunderstanding, pride, and fear. By the end of the conversation, both mother and son were crying, but they were tears of relief and joy, rather than pain. The reconciliation opened the door to the happiest period of their relationship since his childhood. Lillian's health improved following treatment, giving her several more years to enjoy her famous son without the burden of disapproval. She began attending some of his concerts when he performed in England, sitting in VIP sections and watching with amazement as thousands of fans sang along to songs she had once condemned. She saw the joy on their faces and finally understood what her son had been trying to do all along. During these years, Ozzy would call his mother regularly, sharing details about his tours and family life that he had never been able to discuss with her before. The shoebox full of unsent letters became a treasured reminder of their journey toward understanding. Lillian's acceptance had a ripple effect throughout the extended family. Siblings who had felt caught in the middle were finally able to express their pride in their famous brother without fear of maternal disapproval. Lillian Osbourne lived until 1996, passing away at 85 with her family around her, including the son she had once publicly rejected but had come to understand and love completely. In her final years, she had become one of Ozzy's biggest supporters. At her funeral, Ozzy spoke about the journey they had taken together from misunderstanding to acceptance. He talked about the power of love to overcome pride and the value of honest communication in healing old wounds. The letter that had changed everything was kept among Ozzy's most precious possessions. He would often reference it in interviews, talking about the importance of family understanding and the pain that can be caused by hasty judgments. The story of their reconciliation became an inspiration to other families dealing with generational misunderstandings. It demonstrated that it's never too late to bridge the gaps that separate us, as long as love and humility are present on both sides. The reconciliation had implications that extended far beyond their personal relationship. For Ozzy's fans, many of whom had experienced similar rejection from their families, the story provided hope that understanding was possible. The letter itself became a symbol of the power of honest communication to heal long-standing wounds. It demonstrated that admitting mistakes and opening oneself to vulnerability could create opportunities for healing that seemed impossible when pride dominated the relationship. For other parents struggling to understand their children's creative pursuits, Lillian's journey provided a roadmap for moving from judgment to acceptance. Her willingness to reconsider her initial reaction became an example of the kind of growth possible at any age. In the years following their reconciliation, Ozzy often dedicated songs to his mother during concerts, explaining how their relationship had evolved from conflict to understanding. Songs like "Mama, I'm Coming Home" took on new meaning when performed with the knowledge that his actual mother had welcomed him back into her heart. The irony was not lost that many of the songs Lillian had initially condemned were actually expressions of longing for home, family, and acceptance. When she finally heard the vulnerability in her son's voice, she recognized emotions she could relate to as a mother. The music became a bridge between them, rather than a barrier, with Lillian eventually developing preferences among Ozzy's songs and offering opinions about his performances that he valued greatly. Her feedback, coming from someone who had once been his harsh harshest critic, carried special weight. The 6 years between their reconciliation and Lillian's death were precious to both mother and son. They made up for lost time by creating new memories and deepening their understanding of each other in ways that hadn't been possible when disapproval stood between them. Ozzy made sure to spend significant time with his mother whenever he was in England, often extending his stays to have long conversations about his childhood, his career, and his plans for the future. Lillian, freed from the burden of having to disapprove of his life choices, was able to enjoy getting to know the successful, thoughtful man her troubled young son had become. She took particular pleasure in hearing about the positive impact his music had on people's lives, collecting newspaper clippings about charity work he did, and letters from fans who credited him with helping them through difficult periods. What had once been a source of shame became a source of deep pride. When Lillian's health began to decline in her final year, Ozzy spent as much time as possible at her bedside, often playing acoustic versions of his songs for her when she was too tired for conversation. These intimate musical moments represented the full circle their relationship had traveled. The story of Lillian and Ozzy Osbourne's journey from conflict to reconciliation continues to resonate with families facing similar challenges. It demonstrates that relationships can heal and grow even after years of misunderstanding, and that love can ultimately overcome pride and prejudice when people are willing to be vulnerable and honest with each other. The letter that changed everything serves as a reminder that it's never too late to admit mistakes, express love, and rebuild damaged relationships. Lillian's courage in acknowledging her errors and reaching out to her son became a model for other parents struggling to understand children whose paths differed from their expectations. For Ozzy, the experience of reconciliation with his mother became one of the most meaningful achievements of his life, more valuable than any gold record or sold-out concert. It taught him about the power of forgiveness, both given and received, and provided him with a deeper understanding of the complex emotions that drive family relationships. The story ultimately became a testament to the truth that love, when given the opportunity, can transform even the most damaged relationships into sources of strength and joy. It showed that understanding doesn't always come easily or quickly, but that patience, honesty, and willingness to change can create possibilities for healing that once seemed impossible. In the end, both mother and son discovered that their fundamental values had never been as different as they had seemed. Both wanted to see good done in the world, both believed in the importance of helping people through difficult times, and both understood that expressing one's authentic self was essential to living a meaningful life. They had simply needed time and experience to recognize that they were fighting for the same things, just in different ways. The legacy of their reconciliation continues to inspire families to look beyond surface differences and find the common ground that love makes possible. It reminds us all that some of the most important victories in life are not won on stages or in boardrooms, but in the quiet moments when hearts open and understanding replaces judgment.